Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. My name is Andrew Claudio, a.k.a. GMAC. It is time to preview another Knicks matchup, this time, once again, against the Charlotte Hornets. What a difference a week makes. The Knicks played the day after Thanksgiving against the Hornets last Friday, and the Hornets, in a spirited effort, only lost to the Knicks by 1 point. On our perspective, it was a pretty disappointing performance by the Knicks, specifically one Mikal Bridges. And lo and behold, the next two games then happened, and a blowout win against what's left of the Pelicans, that version of the Pelicans on Sunday. And then surprisingly, a blowout win over the Orlando Magic. And now the vibes have returned. We'll see if they can keep going against the Hornets team that we just saw give a great effort about a week ago. So a lot to talk about with this Hornets team. Again, with this Hornets team, I should say. And joining me to talk about this Hornets team from the very popular Stay Hot podcast, Mr. Matt Sponhour. Matt, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to Knicks Film School.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk a little bit of Hornets. You don't get too many opportunities to, surprisingly.
Well, so that's actually my first question, if you don't mind me going there, because you guys cover the league at large, or like the sports at large. You know, a lot of football lately. I've enjoyed your week-to-week recaps. By the way, the answer to how you fix the Jets is pray. Okay, just as a Jets fan, I'm just going to say that from a personal standpoint. We've been wondering that question for 40 years, and we don't know the answer. So we're at the divine intervention section. But like, you probably don't get the chance to talk about how you like the state of the Hornets, what's up with the Hornets, because they haven't been like the national story recently. So I guess from your perspective as a Hornets guy, as a Hornets fan, like, how do you feel about this team? Like, I know Lamelo got off to a hot start and then got hurt. Brandon Miller showed progress. Like, the state of the Hornets from your perspective, what do you got for me?
You know, I don't feel super strongly about it, right? I think the process right now for a lot of people is like the player to player evaluation or development has been pretty good. Like, LaMelo's obviously looked fantastic. Miller, like you said, has taken a nice step. We've seen some good things out of Trey Mann. There's some role players who have shown more, like Josh Green. It's like, okay, you know, even somebody of that level is the type of guy that Charlotte like totally didn't have at the end of last year. If you remember how bleak some of those rotations got, and they were going to like, you know, second round picks like Bryce McGowan's, who just never really developed into anything positive. Like, you're watching a lot of like players who just aren't NBA guys. So to bring in that is good. And I'd like Tijon. I've liked some of the stuff that he's shown, but as a whole, you're 6-15 right now. You're not out of it, obviously. I mean, it's a super long season, but you're not squarely in the Eastern Conference play-in race right now. That's pretty pathetic, man. And I'm not like sitting here mad about it, because I think from a talent perspective, the Hornets are still one more big hit away before we really start to get excited about their young core. So if we're bad this year and LaMelo looks good and Miller takes a step, and then we can like get something going in the lottery one more time, I'm willing to live with it. But I also kind of thought that they would be closer to the play-in than they are right now, maybe foolishly.
Well, so let me spin zone this for you for a second, because so let me just ask you a question. Based off of what you've seen so far, give me a record prediction. Like, if you're projecting out for the rest of the year, let's say LaMelo comes back, relative health, plays 65-70% of the games. Like you said, they're 6-15 now. Are we looking at, like, can they get to 30 and 52? You think 27 and 55 could be the number? What's
I think
like, maybe they overachieve to 35?
20. I don't know if they get to quite 35. I will say they have lost a lot of close games. Even if they finish with like a relatively similar record to what they had last year, which I don't think they're going to be down to 21. But even if they finish to a relatively like similar record, it was a lot more blowouts last year than it's been this year. And I mean, maybe their last 4 games have been decided by 5 points or less. And of course, they can't get any of them to break their way. So I'd say like around 27, 28 is how I'd be feeling about them right now. But, you know, it's still early. And when you say if LaMelo stays healthy and plays 70 games, dude, if LaMelo plays 70 games, that alone makes the season successful, truthfully and honestly.
Yeah.
Because I think the Hornets' number one concern, as ridiculous as it is to say, is whether or not LaMelo can play a full season. People talk about like, oh, is he, a winning player? And the answer is going to be definitely no if he's a guy who can't reliably stay on the court. And there's a lot of dudes like that in the league right now. It's not uncommon for some guys, their bodies just cannot hold up for 82 games. In fact, most guys can't hold up for 82, but a lot of guys can't hold up for 70, for 60. So LaMelo has to not be one of those guys if the Hornets are going to do anything with their build.
To clarify, I said 70% of the remaining games. I think
that's on me. Still,
believe me, I'm with you. Like that would still be an optimistic with how his career has gone so far. But the spin zone I was going to present to you, and it's why I actually think the bottom of the Eastern Conference is in an advantageous position, because the West, I mean, the Lakers obviously lost by 41 last night. That's the story nationally today. The Lakers are 12-10 and firmly in their play-in race. If they were in the Eastern Conference, they would be the 6th seed at the moment. So because you're not in the East, you actually have the benefit of kind of being in this play-in race, because 30 wins might end up being the 10th seed right now. They're only 2 games back in the loss column of 8th seeded Brooklyn, which it's way too early to look at standings. But the spin zone I'm presenting to you is that because of how the lottery goes, there's a world that they're the 10th seed and they make the play-in, and they can, I mean, who knows how symbolic that could potentially be, but still have top 10 lottery odds. So I wonder, because again, to your question about projecting and what does a disappointing season look like, and it's more player involved. If they miss the play-in, but they're close, how much does the play-in matter is basically what I'm asking to you, or is it solely player development based, your evaluation of this season?
Here's the thing: the fact that they can make the play-ins with 30 wins makes the play-ins mean less to me.
Very little. Yeah.
I mean, it would be cool, but I've seen a Hornets team that wasn't really worthy of being in the play-ins get to the play-ins before. And it ended with 2 30-point losses in a row in back-to-back years, if you remember, a couple of seasons ago. That's cool. It's nice when you won 43 games and you got the 9 seed, and it was like, okay, well, we clearly are like building towards something. Of course, we didn't end up building towards anything after that. But if we win 30 games and we're the 10th seed, I mean, I'll celebrate it. I'd rather be, up there, I guess. But at the same time, if we finish with like 27 wins and all of a sudden we have like the 6th best odds instead, I'm not going to be mourning missing out on a play-in game or two, because I really don't think we'd be the level of team to win the back-to-back play-in games you need to. Like, I don't trust the Hornets right now to do that. And then even if you did, watching them go get mauled by the Celtics, I mean, the playoff drought needs to end, but I might rather take the odds at Cooper Flag.
What's the drought at the moment to the Knicks fan that's uneducated?
It's got to be 8 now, right? Because the last time they made it was 2016 with Kemba.
With Kemba,
when they played
that's right.
Heat in the first round.
Yeah, Kemba then went to Kemba. There was 3 years later that he went to Boston after the infamous Kevin Durant to Brooklyn offseason, because Kemba then because Kyrie went to Brooklyn as well, and then Kemba took Kyrie's place in Boston. So it's at 8 years right now.
Right.
The progression toward them being a playoff team, especially in a weaker Eastern Conference, will probably have to be internal to start. I talked a lot about LaMelo, the Friday pod that I just did, and I really didn't talk about Brandon Miller. So I wanted to get your perspective on, like, what have you seen from him so far this year, to the Knicks fan that hasn't watched him recently. Like, I know he's been on a very hot shooting streak. He had 7 threes in the loss to the Sixers the other night, 34 points, a red hot fourth quarter that almost led a comeback. Also, just as a League Pass fan that hates the Sixers, I was very much enjoying that fake comeback. I was hoping that the Hornets would get it done. How have you liked, or how have you viewed his sophomore season so far?
I mean, it's really nice when you see moments like that for Miller, where he can both, slot in as sort of a guy who has to initiate the offense, especially with how, banged up some of the other initiators are for Charlotte, but also can be used in a lot of different, like, off-ball ways. Because we want to see Miller develop into, I don't want to say like a complimentary star, but like that's kind of the role for him, where he's doing a little bit of both, but in 5 years, can he be one of those guys where it's like every team wishes they had an offensive player like Miller who's running around, who's always a threat, who's hitting a ton of threes off the ball, like a ton of movement, a ton of action. That's what I want to see out of him. And clearly, I mean, he's second in the league in 3-point attempts per game, only behind Lamelo, which I knew he was up there, but I didn't realize it was quite that high until I went and looked at it the other day. So I've been happy with that. I will say, though, I've been a little bit disappointed in the terms of like him getting to his mid-range game. I think that Lee has taken that out, and I kind of want to see him still continue to develop as a 3-level scorer as well. I mean, I like the perimeter game that we, obviously we're shooting as many threes as almost anybody. I think outside of the Celtics, we're number 2 right now by only a couple attempts a game. But I want to see him, like continue to fully evolve in that way. But it's also very early in the year, and he's coming off of an injury, so I don't want to get like too carried away with any sort of take that they're like ruining him or using him the wrong way, because his skill set fits very well with what they're doing with him right now.
Yeah, the 10 threes a game for a sophomore is kind of unprecedented, and I think Charles Lee being a Joe Mazzulla student, probably leads to why the offense looks the way it does. I gotta say, well, Boston's in its own stratosphere when it comes to 3-point shooting, and their shot chart. No one, I mean, one of our hosts, Jonathan Macri, made the point yesterday that there's just no other team that has the shot chart of Boston Celtics in NBA history. But I guess this leads to a question about the head coach and how you felt. I mean, you comment about like adapting more toward the Celtics identity and the more threes and taking away the mid-range. I wrestle back and forth because the mid-range is important come playoff time, but when you're developing a player, like you said, you want Brandon Miller to become a player that long-term teams will want, and having, his ability to beat you from deep and space the floor and have defenders honor you on just from a gravity standpoint, I think is important. So just from what you've seen so far this year from Charles Lee, how have you felt?
It's been, I'd say, mostly good. The problem when you're judging a coach like Charles Lee, outside of the fact that it's been, 20 games and you don't want to get out over your skis on anybody like that, especially a guy who's a first-time coach and who's, I think, one of the younger coaches in the entire NBA. A lot of issues that Charlotte has come down to the personnel that I don't necessarily blame them for. And I think whether or not their overall strategy right now will work long-term is going to be determined by whether or not they can get the guys to sort of fit in with the rest of the offense. So they take, like we said, number 2 in threes attempted, right? And they're hitting them at, I think, like a total league average rate. They're 15th in their 3-point making prowess, I guess. Yeah. So whereas you compare it to like the Celtics, and I'm sure they're much, much higher and much more efficient. And sometimes I wonder if Charlotte just, outside of maybe their top couple of guys, have the dudes that are perfect to run that and still need to tailor the offense around what Lee wants to do. But I've loved Lee in interviews. I think he brings a great energy to the team. I think he gets the guys to play hard. He does some things that, fans question a lot, especially like, the Lamelo benching was obviously a big deal. There's a lot of Charlotte Hornets fans. I'm not hating, but there's a lot of Charlotte Hornets fans who are Lamelo Ball fans first. Obviously, he brought up, over a very big fan base. So when that happened, it's like, it's pretty hot button. But then he came back and answered really strong. And sometimes I worry about, getting everybody super invested with the problems that the Hornets have had off the court wise over the last couple of years. So to see Charles Lee be able to, take a hardline stance like that and then get a great response out of Lamelo has been awesome. And to see how just overall, a lot of the young guys, like the most important dudes, have been playing freely and aggressively has been awesome. And that's not just Lamelo, who has clearly been like the most Lamelo version of himself yet, but it's true with like Trey Mann, who I think for a long time struggled with his confidence. Like I've really liked Mann for a long time. I thought that was a great, like, little value pickup that they made last year at the deadline. But there was a lot of times, or even on a Hornets team, where it's like, dude, you got to let it fly. Like, it's okay. It doesn't matter if you have some off shooting nights, compared to like OKC, of course, where it's contender time immediately. He'd be too passive. And this year, I haven't seen that at all for him. So I like his energy. I think being aggressive on playing a modern style of offense is exciting for me. I like that he lets, players be who they are. But whether or not, like the defense is going to turn around for Charlotte in 3 years because they get better personnel and what Lee is trying to do is great, or whether or not, it's not going to make a difference, like we'll have to see. But I'd say overall so far, like I'm positive about him. I like him.
Well, I'll just say this as an outside observer, and I've only obviously seen the Hornets play the Knicks once, and it was an impressive performance that pushed the Knicks to the brink last Friday. But when you're looking at the team, well, I can only personally say from the teams the Knicks have played so far this year, you can tell when a team just doesn't have a. I don't want to criticize the coaches too much that they've played against, but it's very clear that the team in New Orleans has quit on their head coach after what I saw on Sunday night. It's very clear when the Knicks played Washington that, I mean, that's just not a team with a direction or a culture established at the moment. Then you go to, Brooklyn. I hate to say it because I like making fun of Brooklyn, but that's a team with a clear direction and a culture being established, and they fight hard. And a team that supposedly was supposed to be, full tank, and where Washington is currently the 8th seed. And the same can be said about Utah when the Knicks played them. And I'll say the same thing can be said for what the Hornets looked like on Friday, which is why I go into this matchup, Matt, not necessarily looking at a pushover. Like, I know they're 6-15, but they've earned, at least from this one Knicks fan and content creator, my respect. The big wrinkle, I think, going into this game that Knicks fans, didn't see on Friday is that Nick Richards is back, and he had 22 and 14 in his game the other night against the Sixers. I mean, you tell me going into this, how much of a difference will Nick Richards make in this matchup against the Knicks?
Well, obviously, I mean, if you watched the last Knicks game, if I'm not mistaken, Taj Gibson got some minutes in that one.
Taj, yes.
Shout out to him. Obviously, if that's how down to it you're getting, you have a pretty major problem. And if this has been a problem for Charlotte forever, where they just can't get serious center play, and if you don't have that interior presence, like it's tough to be a serious team at all. Richards has been playing really well. To have him back absolutely is a big deal, especially defensively when you have so many guys on the perimeter who can't hold up. If you don't have that backline help either, I mean, it's just too easy for anybody to go at mismatches. Still, is probably going to be pretty easy. But now you've got at least some sort of second line of defense. So it's a massive deal. And then you also have Mark Williams starting to work his way back into the rotation. Now, how big of a factor he's going to be in game 2 when he only played 9 minutes the other night against the Sixers, we'll have to see. But I think it's a big deal when you're running it's been a lot of like Tijon at the 5. And, I think we've seen some good stuff from him, but, a 19-year-old, 6'10", like truly a wing guy who is an absolute raw project playing the 5, who struggles with like his defensive positioning. Like, that's a disaster a lot of the time. Not through any fault of his own or Lee's. It's just like you run out of options. Or before, when Grant Williams was healthy, it was a lot of Grant Williams at the 5. And it's just, that obviously has its limitations. So I still think they're pretty hobbled with no LaMelo and no Trey Mann. Unfortunately, like, they're an offense that already is not that good because I think they lack like ball handlers. And when you take, 2 of their best 3 guys, or maybe 2 of their best 4 guys in that sense, it gets really down to it for them. So it's going to be a lot of Mikic, who has been bad this year, and KJ Simpson, who is a, second round rookie, who are still developing opinions on. It gets really tough for them. So I think they've got a better shot. I think they've got a better shot, obviously, with serious centers, but we'll see. I'm not.
You're not coming in as confident as Knicks fans are scared of this matchup.
No. They can make it close. They'll play tough, but we'll see.
Yeah. And that, I think, is the mark of what you want to see in the first year of a head coach from a young team. Just like, are these games competitive? And am I wasting my time tuning in for 4 quarters, or is this gone at halftime and I can go check out League Pass? Now, you mentioned Mikic being bad this year. He actually is responsible for him, and Josh Green are probably responsible for the most panic moment for the Knicks this season. And it's the moment he took Mikal Bridges off the dribble and got to the bucket on Friday. And then obviously the Josh Green interception, I'll call it, the buzzer beater at halftime of Mikal Bridges. Now, Bridges has responded with 2 very good games, one against the Pelicans on Sunday, and then obviously against Orlando, he was very good as well. But I actually want to pivot now into, I mean, just your thoughts on the Knicks. You know, like you obviously talk about the league at large and sports on a national scale. The Knicks have been a national story this year, making 2 blockbuster trades. I mean, just from your perspective, like what did you think of the 2 big trades they made this summer, and where does this put them as far as contenders are concerned?
You know, I liked the Mikal trade because I think a lot of their options to make another big move were going to be for guys who I just didn't trust to have any sort of staying power. Like, for instance, Paul George, guy who clearly just doesn't line up with the timeline of this team and forces you to be like, we've got to win right in this very moment. And is also a guy who you don't really trust to play a lot of games. And so much of winning in the playoffs now is just, can you stay healthy?
Right.
It's almost more important than actually winning in the regular season, right? So I thought Mikal, as a timeline fit and as a guy who could play, you know, into a role more than maybe some other guys, was a really good get. Now, obviously, he struggled early, but I think about, like, you know, the Timberwolves, for instance, who had a really tough time with the Gobert trade year 1, but because it wasn't like we need to be the finals winner this year, it played out for a season, and then they looked really good last year. Now they trade Karl-Anthony Towns, and now they look different again. But I think giving yourself more than 1 year to run it back and build chemistry, which is what you did with the Mikal trade, is a good thing. Now, you might be sitting here and saying they paid a little bit too much.
Which they did.
But
it's understood if you want to go all in, you know.
Right. But I think that has a chance to right itself and be more than just what Mikal is in the first 20 games, in a way where if you traded for Paul George, like, you're probably getting the best version of him season 1. And if it doesn't work out, then it's going to be downhill from there. As far as the Karl-Anthony Towns trade goes, I really like that one as it stands. I mean, their offense has been really great with him.
Yeah.
You know, and he has his limitations. Like, I'm interested to see defensively how it works out with him as, you know, the anchor for a lot of it. But I think what he gives you on offense and the spacing just totally changes their game. And I think not holding on to Randall was a good move.
Yeah, that's been the reaction so far here in New York as well. Can I tell you something about Cat that I didn't realize
Sure.
Not realize is probably isn't the right word, but there hasn't been a game this year that they've lost because of him. Like, we're 21 games into the season. They've lost 8 times. He's like had moments defensively where he's been bad. Sure. Like, he's not going to be a rim protector, but in those games, he's pulling down 15 rebounds and scoring 30 points. Like, he's been such a net positive, and the offense in particular has just been like he's going to make all NBA and make the All-Star team this year. I actually wonder if he might start the All-Star game this year if this play continues. But I just there's been games where Brunson held the ball too long. Like, we never say a bad word about Jalen Brunson here. He's
of course,
you know, not allowed. He's off limits. Like, he's Teflon. But like, there's been very clear games this year where Cat was cooking and Brunson went a little bit ISO heavy against the switch defense. And like, you can criticize him for part of the reason they lost the game, like him having a bad shooting night. I don't have that example with Karl-Anthony Towns yet this year, where teams were just, we're going to pick on Cat all night defensively, and it cost the Knicks the win because he went 3 of 16. Like, there's been a couple games where they've run a lot of pick and roll and take advantage of him and drop, but he's then responded with like 37 and 12. And it's like, oh, well, I'm going to blame Cat. He's like they carried them offensively to this point. So I'm very curious when we're met with that moment of adversity as a fan base, what that could potentially mean. And I mean, you tell me what you think as far as the contender status of it all. You know, it's not really going to be graded by how he does against the Hornets in December. It's going to be against Boston or Cleveland or Milwaukee or even Orlando sometime in May and April, you know?
It's interesting. I mean, it's tough right now to have them over the Celtics,
right? Or anybody for that matter. Yeah.
A fully healthy Celtics is just so strong. But I think they're right up there with, I mean, it's Knicks, Cavs, and Celtics as the real big dogs. And I think, you know, if you can get in a series where maybe the Celtics are a little banged up, which is not impossible to imagine. I mean, they've been without Porzingis, I mean, a lot, and he's super injury prone. I think they'd be a real threat. I think if you could see a big Karl-Anthony Towns series where, you know, they maybe have a little bit trouble matching up with him, or they have to move Tatum onto him, and then that frees up other guys, like, I could see it. I do think that the Celtics just overall defensive personnel 1-5 when Porzingis is healthy is just a league above where a lot of other teams are. And then, of course, they have just as much offensive talent as anybody. But I think the Knicks are in a pretty good spot. Like I could see them making the finals sometime in the next 3 or 4 years when like the cards fall their way. A lot to me of making the finals is like getting the things to break your way. And the fact that it feels like the Knicks are going to have not 1 year where everything's on the line and, you know, we can't have a moment where Kevin Durant's toe is on the line and we lose a series and our team can't recover from not getting it the first chance we have. The fact that they're going to go at it multiple times makes me feel like we will see a deep Knicks run at some point, like to the finals in the next 3 or 4 years. But it obviously depends on what you see from Mikhail's continuing to develop and what you see from Karl-Anthony Towns is like, what is his weakest game and how he looks in the playoffs, because he's obviously had his bad moments. So,
yeah. And that's the impatience of New Yorkers to an extent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, to your point about Minnesota, like in the beginning of the Gobert thing, it was like, what is this? What did they do? And that was year one of that. And we didn't know that was going to be year one of only two. The Knicks seem like they're going to have 3 or 4, maybe even 5 cracks at this with this current core, especially with the way it's built, with Brunson on the contract that he signed, the Deuce McBride on the contract that he signed, with Cat in-house, with Mikal and Josh Hart and OG in-house. Like, they're going to have a lot of runs at this. And look, like, I want to say it was Tom Haberstroh. I don't know if you read this a couple of years ago, but he did a study of like the last 30 finals runs and 30 champions, and all of them benefited from a major injury to the other team. Like even Boston last year, overwhelmingly good during the regular season. No Jimmy Butler, Donovan Mitchell gets hurt, Tyrese Halliburton gets hurt, and then by the time they get to the finals, you're playing a team in Dallas that was the 5th best team in their conference coming into the playoffs, you know?
Exactly. I mean, nothing is more important than the finals and being healthy or just, you know, running up to that. What's amazing about this last Celtics team is that, I mean, they're probably the first finals winner who was missing a major player and still got it done. You think about basically everybody else. It's like, if you're down a guy, it's just so hard to overcome that in basketball. And then, I mean, you look at like any given playoff, you know, just overall like year, how many teams are just sunk by being too banged up by the end of it, and they can't overcome a certain number of injuries. It's a ton of them. It's a ridiculous amount of teams.
Yeah, and what's even more annoying is it was looked at as the Celtics built like a very strong, like a historically great top 6. And now Peyton Pritchard is like morphing into a 6th man of the year candidate. Sam Hauser had 20 points
of course
last night. Like they've actually built out a core. Obviously, as a New Yorker, I hate that Boston is succeeding and building something so much of a template that we're trying to beat. But you know, we'll see what happens. Can I ask a generational question? Because the chat has brought it up a little bit. But if you don't mind me asking, how old are you?
I'm 23.
So you're 23. So you had mentioned earlier that there are LaMelo stands that aren't necessarily Hornet fans that came over. And so they're not invested in how the Hornets do. They're just invested in how LaMelo does. And like, I come from like you for their uniform, like your heroes are built on guys that did things in your favorite team's uniform. Like my favorite player ever is Carmelo Anthony. And yet even I understand he didn't do much as far as winning goes in a Knicks uniform, but that was the first real experience with standom that I had. But I recognized when he was being criticized, like, yeah, the Knicks didn't win as much. I understand if people are critical of him. And like I've saw it the last couple of years with like the Frank Ntilikina hive, former Charlotte Hornet, the RJ Barrett hive still exists and is during the Knicks very historic offensive year. They're still saying like, oh, see what would happen if we had RJ. You know, just from your perspective, because I do think this is a generational thing. Like, how do you navigate that? Like, do you have players that you just root for that are like you put above the Hornets' success? Like, how do your friends do that, or your age group? You know,
honestly, I think a lot of people in my age demographic do. But but maybe not quite as many as you would think. I feel like there's a lot of people on Twitter who are more player people than anything. But then if you go talk to people who like maybe aren't quite that into it, everybody else is still like very team based. And me personally, I mean, there's guys that I root for that I like, that I'd like celebrate them getting a ring or whatever. But if you ask me, like, would I have any of those players win a ring or the Hornets? Like, it wouldn't even be a question. So it's Charlotte first for me. But I don't sit around and like get like mad that there's people who are fans of LaMelo, but not the Hornets. I get it, especially with the Hornets. I get it.
That's funny. I will say that makes me happy that you guys that the Stay Hot Pod has that perspective, because you guys are going to be here long after us dinosaurs are. So I'm hoping that like there is a next generation of people that still root for teams, and that focus still exists. Because like I'll be damned if one day like, oh well, he's gone, I'm gone too, is just like the perspective of the entire league, which I think the league is kind of worried about at the moment too. So we'll see what happens. If you don't mind, before we wrap up, I want to get some questions from people watching live.
Sure.
We're going to go to Chris Persiane, NKFS contributor here, our host of Draft Class, our draft guru here at Knicks Film School. He sends in a super chat. Thank you, Chris. If Bryce and Brunson switched jobs, who'd be better? I'm assuming this is Bryce Young, the quarterback of the Carolina Panthers. Is that your team as well?
Yeah. I'm a Panthers fan.
Gotcha.
I have no idea. I mean,
so now your quarterback's a lefty, so the right side of your line would need to be better. And if Bryce could play point, honestly, he could probably he probably couldn't do Brunson's job, but he could be serviceable in this offense.
I don't know. I have a hard time imagining, like, Bryce, I don't think is like a crazy athlete, and he's 5'9".
Yeah.
So I think from just a size perspective, he would have a harder time in the NBA than Brunson would have in the NFL. But obviously, like, I have no idea how much like either of their skills would translate to the other sport. But I'd go Brunson would be a slightly better Panthers quarterback than Bryce would be an NBA point guard.
I just say this on behalf of an irrational New Yorker. I have entirely too much confidence in Jalen Brunson's ability to answer this question rationally. So, yes, I think the Panthers would probably be in the Super Bowl this year because they now have Jalen. They now have the captain on their team. So, that's my answer to that. I'll let you answer this from Knicks Fan Control. Is Matt secretly Johnny Valentine from TikTok?
I saw this earlier. I tried to look up who Johnny Valentine was. I couldn't find them immediately.
Idea. Knicks Fan Patrol, please explain your joke in the chat. Shout out to our next super chat from Juanon. Salute GMAC. Shout out to you, Juanon. Happy to finally catch one of these live. If you have time, please ask your guest if he's heard anything about Lamelo Ball. Heard something and saw a few tweets, but could be BS. Hashtag fire Tibbs. You tell me, is there anything you've heard about Lamelo, whether it be, answer the question, or have you heard anything about Lamelo Ball?
The only things that I saw about this were LeVar saying like help is on the way, about like clearly like implying some sort of team up between Lonzo and Lamelo. I thought, what specifically like that would entail, I have no idea. I wouldn't be against Lonzo being on the Hornets. I mean,
I just realized he said Lonzo. That's my bad. Lonzo is what he's talking about. Yes.
Yeah, it's so, but I also think, I have a hard time seeing the Hornets like matching up contracts to get half a year Alonzo right now and then have him be a free agent. I think, this offseason, if Lonzo, as a guy who sort of needed a prove it deal, wanted to come to Charlotte and be backup point or run with LaMelo. I mean, I know he's coming off a major injury, but for the right price, like I'd be really down. Like obviously Lonzo, when he was doing his thing, was a fantastic player, who I think could fit in well with a lot of offenses. So if LeVar wants to set that up like with Lonzo, and like I'm kind of down for it, but I don't think there's been any like serious noise about it yet, at least that I've seen.
Would you welcome the full ball circus and like have LiAngelo sign the Ryan Diarchak, basically the Bronny contract, and just have him?
Well, he was G League, or he
well, that's what I'm saying. Like bring him back just to be like a 12th or 15th man. That
starts to get a little bit too much. Like, I mean, he's not an NBA player, right?
Right.
With Lonzo, it's like even if we didn't have LaMelo and there was no LeVar, like I'd be down for that move just in a vacuum. LiAngelo, if he wants to be on the G League team, cool. he wants to be on the actual roster, honestly, and that's what it took to get Lonzo, I'd say no.
Yeah. I gotta be honest as a Knicks fan, also with interest in Lonzo, just as a like they're missing one more wing. They have Landry Shamet recovering from a dislocated shoulder. That's the spot, like a guy that could come in, play the 2 or the 3, guard the 1, 2, or 3. You could play him next to, I mean, you probably have to switch him up a bit because they have 2 smaller guards in Deuce McBride and Campaign. Regardless, Lonzo's a bit of a trade target for contending teams too, which is why I'm curious if the Hornets were to get involved in this, how that would potentially work out. I think your path making more sense, that it's a make good, prove yourself contract in the offseason, and he gets to play with his brother, which, you know, could end up. You got to go back and go get Caleb, somehow get Caleb Martin back on the team. You just have the Martins and the Balls both on the same team in that sense. Next one from Kevin Danishevsky. Matt, would you ever consider trading LaMelo, and for what kind of package? Super high on the guy, but it feels like a change of scenery could benefit both parties. The floor is yours, Matt.
Well, you know, Charlotte's still a team. I feel like, you know, your path to success, if you're the Hornets, is LaMelo blossoming. I'm not going to say that he's untradeable in the sense that, like, if somebody offers a ridiculous package, you probably take it. But it's hard to imagine that you get back a better package specifically for a rebuilding team for LaMelo, because LaMelo is already the type of asset that a rebuilding team would want. I think a lot of the talks about that are frustrated that in year 5, the Hornets are not that great, and fair enough. And like, who knows, if LaMelo's camp got really frustrated, you know, obviously the Hornets' hand could be forced at some point. Although I think it's a little early for that. It'd be pretty quick in the life cycle for a player to start thinking about that. But I think for the most part, it makes sense for Charlotte to hold on to him. And I really don't buy into the whole idea of, like, the Hornets picking one of Miller or LaMelo to build around.
Is there some of that already?
You hear people talk about that a lot, at least in Hornet circles, and where it's like this idea that they can't coexist. I think people get it from the fact that LaMelo is just a very, you know, like, high usage player, but he needs to be on this current Hornets offense. So I'm not pro trading LaMelo as it stands right now, unless they get obviously a ridiculous package.
You just hit on it. I think the right deal always makes it easier. You know, like if you were a Jazz fan and you were like, I'm not trading Rudy Gobert, Donovan Mitchell, and then someone turned around and said, here's like 7 picks and 5 swaps. Like, oh, okay, well, we'll trade Rudy Gobert and Donovan Mitchell. Like, no players untradeable under the right contract or the right pick package that can be returned. I don't know, and especially with his injury history, I just don't know what the right pick package that makes Charlotte feel comfortable about trading the franchise icon, which is what I think New Orleans is going through right now with Zion, that his ceiling being what it is, you have no idea what you can potentially get back that's equal value, you know, even though he's a part-time player in that sense. I understand his injuries are so much more extreme than what LaMelo is going through, you know?
Right. It's impossible to know what they do as it stands right now with Zion, because if you're a contending team, can you trade for Zion knowing how injury prone he is and knowing how important it is to stay healthy? Like, if you have a Zion level player get injured, you're almost certainly, like, not going to be able to go on a run like you need to.
Right.
To bank on that it just feels impossible, you know?
So what's funny is I think last year was the realized version of, like, he played 70 games. They won 49. They were in that play-in against the Lakers. He was dominating, and it's like, oh, okay, this is what a season of healthy Zion looks like. They're actually going to be a tough out in the playoffs. Then we saw, like, later in that play-in game, he gets hurt and hasn't really been healthy since. And that it feels like is the curiosity around New Orleans. Last question for you. It's from Ben Kim Gervey. Question: what's the hope meter look like for Charlotte fans? Is there a coherent strategy?
I think a lot of Charlotte fans are decently hopeful right now. There's frustration that they're not winning, but they're clearly playing tough. And there's a lot of young guys that you can say, hey, this might be a dude. There's no young player on the team right now where you're like, this guy is obviously, like, not going to make it, and we spent a big pick on him. Not to say that, like, you know, everybody's going to turn out the way that you need them to. But I think there's a lot of optimism there. Now, for me personally, it's going to come down to how the process is for the front office going forward.
Mm-hmm.
I think they've been doing a pretty decent job over the last, 365 days. I liked them selling at the deadline. They've got some extra first round draft picks, which the Hornets never have. They never sell. They're always in that purgatory, but they're always like the worst team in that purgatory. They're like trying to win and they're getting like 29 wins. They're the worst team that's like not tanking. So
Well, how much of that was MJ though, being like his competitive nature?
It's seeming like a pretty decent amount.
Yeah,
it's
he was
like
just like
a lot.
If you have a chance to make the playoffs, there's pride in that. Whereas you probably don't want to just push your ceiling being the 8th seed and then you make the play in. That's not a season you walk away from successful unless you're Michael Jordan,
Right. It's not something any fan like really looks forward to. But I also don't want to say that I'm like too crazy high on the Hornets' future as it stands right now, because there's a lot of rebuilding teams that you would much rather be. And I think you need Lamelo and Miller to really hit their high-end outcomes for you to feel like with the young guys that they've got on the team right now that they're going to go be a serious contender, unless you bring somebody else in and hit on that. So I'm optimistic, but they've got work to do.
So another question just came in, a super chat from Kevin Danishevsky. Are you willing to trade Green? So Josh Green, New York could use.
Yeah, I think Charlotte for the right price would be looking to trade him. Now he's young and he's on a very good contract.
Very good.
So
yeah,
I kind of felt the same way about PJ Washington, where I'm like, this guy is like young and you want to keep good role players around like that so you can start to build up this team a little bit. That's the one dude we sold who I was like, dang, I don't know. But for the right price, like, yeah, I think Charlotte should be fine trading almost anybody right now, considering they're 6-15. But he's also not somebody I'm actively shopping for sure.
That's what I'm curious about. A couple things, like Hornets related, just like they do have a lot of young pieces that you're curious what they do. I think to your point, Lamelo and Miller are the ones that matter. So build around them as best as you can, and they're the two you focus on. I'm still so fascinated by what these new CBA constraints do for teams going forward. Like the Knicks are strapped at a certain point where they're hard capped at the first apron. You have teams that don't want to go in to the second apron, not because they don't want to be cheap, but just because of the difficulty to improve your team after you get hard capped in that area. So I'm not even sure I'm all that educated on it. I know we have some people at Knicks Film School are, but it used to be that you could just be like, oh, I'd like that guy. He would fit well on the basketball court. And now there's these cap machinations that you have to consider when talking about, transactional talk, so we'll see what happens. Matt, was this the most Hornets you've talked so far this season, or have you been able to talk elsewhere? Yeah, this season.
I got invited on another podcast with some buddies of mine. Like, this isn't shade at them at all. When the Hornets were like, they were like 4-2 at one point this year. Like, they were kind of off to a semi-hot start, and LaMelo had played a couple of games. And then between the invite and when I got on the podcast, they collapsed. So we talked about them for about 15 minutes, and they said, yeah, we're not doing the whole Hornets show. We're talking about something else. So yes, this takes first place.
Well, I don't know if I should say you're welcome or I'm sorry, but thank you for coming on the Knicks Film School Podcast to preview this matchup against the Charlotte Hornets. Before you get out of here, please let the fine folks at home know where they can find you and the Stay Hot Pod.
Oh, Stay Hot Pod. It's on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and I'm Sponhour or Sponhour M on Twitter and TikTok mostly.
And the Blue Sky. I saw you're on Blue Sky
and
too.
The Blue Sky. That's true.
Yes. We're over there, Blue Sky, and whatever they're calling them over there. So, Matt, this was fun. I wish you no luck tonight because obviously I want the Knicks to get a big W, but I'm intrigued by the Hornets. And I went to school in Virginia back when they were the Bobcats. I like that was my home away from home for basketball games because it was just a 2-hour drive. Like when the Knicks were in town, that was my trip to go see the Knicks every year. And I mentioned I was a Karl-Anthony fan. Never saw him play. He was either like out or injured. There was a game he played 1 minute, got hurt, and then didn't play the rest of the game in one of the games I went to.
I'm waiting to see LaMelo in a game, man. I still haven't, dude. It's
with the same thing.
Brutal.
Yeah,
it's impossible. Yeah.
So you're in Charlotte or you're in the North Carolina area?
I'm
at the
in
moment? Where are
Cincinnati.
you? So you're in Cincy at the moment.
Yeah,
so,
I'm from South Carolina, but I've lived in Ohio for a long time.
So what's the you have to go to Cleveland? Is that the closest team for you to watch, or is it
Indianapolis.
Indiana? Okay, you could tell being an elite New Yorker, really, like from the coast. I have no idea how the rest of the country's geography maps
Look,
out.
I didn't until I because I lived in Columbus, and then Columbus is about 2 hours from Cleveland south. Cincinnati's 2 more hours south from Columbus, and then Indianapolis is kind of off west about 2 hours. So it's
Being in Ohio. How are they this week after what happened on Saturday?
it's bad.
It's bad.
I mean,
Okay.
it's bad. It's incredibly bad. It's probably worse than like any other loss of dang near any other sports team. I mean, Ohio State's fan base is massive. I mean, it's the biggest in college football, and it's very, very serious stuff, especially in Columbus. Columbus is a big city. I mean, it's Ohio State and almost nothing else. I mean, the Blue Jackets are there, but they stink.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's rough.
That's the only perspective I have from living down south is recognizing how big college football is, and like the understanding that like, oh, the whole state roots for this team. Like there are pockets in New York that don't root for the Knicks or don't watch basketball, but like the whole state probably roots for Ohio State. I'm not even the biggest college football fan, and even I know the gravity of that situation where they're like, fire the coach because they're lost the regular season game to Michigan. So you can find you and the guys, Theo and Braden, talking about them over at the Stay Hot Pod, talking about that game and the reaction to it on one of your most recent episodes. So go on and check that out. Matt, thank you so much for joining me. You guys know where to find all the socials and all the pod links will be hyperlinked in the episode description here. So thank you, Matt, for joining me. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another edition of the Knicks Film School pregame show. If you dug the show, please head over to iTunes, drop a 5-star rating and a review. If you're watching, whether it's now or on the replay, please like this video. Remember to subscribe. I will be back on Saturday to preview the Knicks game at noon against the Detroit Pistons. The game is at 7:30. We'll be doing the pregame pod at noon. But until next time, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Enjoy the game tonight, and I will speak with you soon. Peace.